Right, I think we've started. Okay, cool. Recording has started. So hi everyone, and welcome to today's live Festive Tech Calendar session. I'm joined by Mohit Batra. Hi Mohit, how are you?
Hey Gregor, I'm doing good. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to this. I have collated a few questions from the community, so I've got a list of questions that we'll ask. I'll start off in a wee minute, but just wanted to say a big thank you for doing this. There's a lot of people in my work are interested in this session. So this will be this is obviously recorded, and people will watch this back. So this is going to be good. I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask you myself. First of all, I just wanted to say thanks for doing this. Now that we've done that, first question I have for you, Mickey, what is Azure Synapse? Tell me all about it. Tell me what it isn't, what it is, and what I can use it for.
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Gregor, for having me here, and to your team as well for giving me this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to this one, and I hope more and more people will watch the recording as well. So whatever we discuss here, I think will go out in the community as well. So thank you for having me here, and let's. I'll just quickly go through, what exactly is Azure Synapse, and then of course,
Cool.
we'll go ahead and pick up your questions.
Cool.
Okay, so let me just take you straight away to. I'll just quickly go ahead and show you, basically what, let's say if we want to get started building a modern data warehouse. Now, it's not just about modern data warehouse, but there are a lot of different architectures which are there. So you can build, if you want to build a Lambda architecture, you want to build a Kappa architecture, you want to build, let's say, Delta architecture or modern data warehouse, lake house. So a lot of different architectures are there. But I'm just taking one of them just for the reference purpose so that we can see how the different Azure services fits into this architecture, and then we'll go ahead and talk about the Azure Synapse. So first of all, if we have got, let's assume there is a lot of data coming from structured data sources. This could be, of course, these could be production databases, catering to different environments or catering to different applications from which we want to go ahead and extract the data. Or we can have the data into different file formats. So you can have data coming from semi-structured or unstructured formats, which could include, JSON files, CSVs, log files, or XML files. A lot of different formats are there. Or you can have the unstructured formats like, let's say, the audio files or the video files. So sometimes, we want to extract data or the metadata of these audio and video files. So there could be various different sources from which we would want to extract the data. And as part of the modern data warehouse, the first thing that we do is, do the ingestion part. So we just want to bring in these data into some kind of storage, or use a certain tool to get this data into some kind of storage so that we have one single layer to actually have that raw data. So this is where we can use Azure Data Factory. I'm sure you very well know this part. So we have got Azure Data Factory using which we can extract data from various different components and bring it into some kind of storage. Now, typically these days, of course, you can store your data into databases, into NoSQL, NoSQL stores as well. But typically people store that into Azure Storage or Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Very, very typical, you get data from databases, semi-structured, unstructured data formats, extract all the metadata or the data which is required and put that into storage or Data Lake Gen 2. Now, once we have it there, in the storage layer, that is where we start extracting this raw data. So of course, our raw data has just landed into the storage or data lake. So that is our raw format. And from here, we just want to go and start preparing the data. So, we would want to transform this data. And that is where we can use various different services in Azure. You can use Azure SQL. So if you want that, if you don't have huge volumes of data, you can go and start using Azure SQL, which a lot of people do as well. Or we can use Azure HT Insight, which contains Hadoop, which contains Spark, which contains Storm. And there are a lot of different open source big data technologies which are there in HT Insight. We can also go ahead and use Azure Databricks, which is a Spark-based environment. And we can start processing that, we can start processing the data. And of course, there is another tool called Azure Data Lake Analytics. Now, this is something not being used too much these days. So a lot of different ways are available for us to process the data. And once we process this data, we just go ahead and, let's say we pick up the raw data into these technologies, or maybe I should point to Databricks, which is the most common one. So we pick up the raw data, process it, and put the processed data back, let's say, into Data Lake. So Data Lake can act as one single place to, store the raw as well as the processed data. Then, of course, we can go and we have to make this data available to the end customers as well. So we can put the data into Data Lake, which is processed, or we can go and put this data into dedicated SQL pool, which was earlier called as Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now it has been renamed to dedicated SQL pool. And this is something very similar to, let's say, AWS Redshift, or we have got Snowflake. So, and those lines, this is based on the MPP architecture. Or we can use Azure Analysis Services. People can build up cubes, and they can make this. They can, or the business users can extract the data from here, either using, let's say, Power BI, or you can use Excel and extract, the basically extract the data, then make it available, and then do self-service BI. Now, this is something which are all the individual services in Azure. Now, there is one big challenge with this one. Now, just to make this architecture work, we have got lots of different components. We have got Databricks, we have got Data Lake, Data Factory. So this means we have to do, we have to set them up. We have to make sure that they are fully secure. All the right security is in place. We have to manage these services. We have to monitor these services. So a lot of different components means obviously a lot of different overhead involved in building up this structure. And this is where, just to cut it short. So even though I've taken a bit of time, but I think, just to cut short this architecture, this is where we have got Synapse. So Synapse is basically, which is an umbrella of multiple services, which can help us, do all these different things in one single environment. So even if we go and just say that Azure Synapse is basically, it's an umbrella of all the different of multiple Azure data services, that's not wrong. So what Microsoft is doing, they are bringing lots of different data services into Azure Synapse. And it's not just like, we are just getting this data, these services at one place, and they don't, and there is nothing else apart from it. It's not just bringing in these services, but they are also making it highly integrated. They are making them highly integrated. So there are high speed connectors. There are, you can just use any of these services and extract the data from other places. So basically, they are very well integrated across, and you can build up your complete architecture just by using Synapse. So whether you want to ingest, store, prep, and make it available to the end customers, including Power BI, that is something which is available here. So this is, a quick, where does exactly the Azure Synapse fits in. Now, I'm just going to show you, what exactly is there in the Azure Synapse. And, I'll just skip through the history part, and I'll straight away show you what is there in the Synapse architecture. So first of all, what we have is the Synapse workspace. So if anybody works with, let's say, Databricks, so for the Databricks, we also create a workspace. In the same way, for Azure Synapse also, we create a workspace where multiple users can come in and they can start working together. And once we create the workspace, basically we get a UI, and that UI is called Studio. So you can use this word interchangeably, saying, it's a Synapse workspace or a studio, but it's one in the, it's workspace is like an environment, and Studio is basically the UI which is there. Now within that, there is a storage layer. So what you can do, you can have basically there will be one data lake Gen 2, which is by default integrated into Synapse. So if you want, this is integrated, available to everyone. If you want to store your data here, if you want to, anything, any temporary files, any production data that you want to store here, you can put that into the storage. And also you can bring in other data sources as well. So let's say if I have got, I'm working with a very big project, and I have got, tens of data lakes which are there, or Cosmos DBs are there, or other technology, other different data sources are there. I can connect them to the Synapse environment. So that means that I don't have to move out and see where is the data, what is there in the data, and how do I browse it. So everything is available in one single place. Then apart from the storage, as we just talked about, that we can do data preparation, and that is where we have got multiple compute options within the Synapse. So first, we have got dedicated SQL pool. Now, dedicated SQL pool, as we just talked about, it's the Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which was earlier it was Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now it is dedicated SQL pool. It is available as a standalone component in Azure. So if you don't want to use Synapse, fine, you can still use the dedicated SQL pool database, or we can go and use dedicated SQL pool within Synapse environment as well. Then there is Apache Spark pool. So if you use, let's say, HT Insight, or if you use Databricks and you use Spark, and now you want to use one single environment to do all your development, you can use Spark within Synapse as well to do your data processing. In fact, when I do, of course, when I do some sessions, a lot of people say that can we use the same notebooks or same code that we have written in Databricks within Synapse with hardly a very few changes which are very specific to Databricks or Synapse. Very few changes, we can do those changes, and then we can start bring in the same code from Databricks to Synapse and vice versa, and then we can start using that. So of course, they both are, working on the Spark. They are bringing in newer versions. They are bringing in more optimizations, and both of them are doing it. So whether you want to use Databricks to use Spark, or you want to use Synapse to use Spark, it's up to you. But of course, there are the few differences that we need to know. Then there is another interesting compute called serverless SQL. So you can see there are two different compute options. There is a dedicated SQL pool option, which was the Azure SQL Warehouse. And there is a new option called serverless SQL. Now, the benefit of having serverless SQL is that you don't need to have any kind of pre-provisioned environment running. So let's say if I'm using dedicated SQL, I need to set it up. And as soon as I start it, I have to start paying for it. So this database, when it is running, I have to pay for it, even if I'm using it or if I'm not using it. On the other side, if I'm using Spark, we set up a Spark cluster, we start the Spark cluster. As soon as the cluster starts, I have to pay for it, whether I'm using it or if I'm not using it. But then comes the serverless SQL, which means that I can go and run queries on lots of different data sources. So I can run queries on Azure SQL. I can run queries on data lake using SQL language, using serverless SQL. I can write simple SQL queries that can query data lake. Then I can run queries on Cosmos DB. In fact, there are lots of different sources, and Microsoft is plugging in more and more sources into serverless SQL. So that means I don't need to have any provisioned infrastructure. Whenever I run the query, it will give me the results, and whatever data it has processed, I just need to pay for that. So just think about, from the analyst perspective, if suddenly analyst is, sitting at night and, just want to run few queries, the analyst does not need to have a working infrastructure running or, infrastructure running. I can just go at nighttime and I can just right click on something, a file, and say, just show me what is there in the data. I want to run, where clause, group bys, right on the file without having any provisioned infrastructure. So if you have got less volumes of data, you can simply play around with serverless SQL. You can read the data, process the data, write it back to data lake after processing it without having any kind of infrastructure. So this can turn out to be extremely cheaper option if you have got lesser volumes. Obviously, you'll have to do your own benchmarking to see that, in terms of cost, whether it will be beneficial or not, but this is something which is pretty useful. So no big infrastructure required, and you can actually process, GBs and TBs of data by using serverless SQL. And then we have the ingestion option, which includes Synapse pipelines. Now that means that Azure Data Factory is built into Azure Synapse, and that is where we have got, the Azure Synapse pipelines and Azure Data Factory is almost the same, except for, few major, in fact, few minor differences. But I think, Microsoft is making both of them at par with each other. So we have got Synapse pipelines, and then there is another thing called mapping data flows. People who are aware here about mapping data flows in Data Factory, it's the same mapping data flows available here. Just quickly, I'll mention. So mapping data flows allows you to visually create your ETL pipelines. And once you run it, it actually creates a Spark cluster in the background and convert your visual pipelines into Spark code, and then it will run on Spark. So you can perform, you can process terabytes of data by using Visual Editor. Just drag and drop the the components. Okay, I want to do this and that, and mapping data flows can work. Can do the stuff for you. So if you're don't want to go into Python, Scala, these languages, you just want to visually create your ETL pipelines, you can do it with mapping data flows. And another major benefit of having Synapse is the one single platform. So you can do monitoring, management, security, everything is one single place, fully integrated with Azure Active Directory. So you don't need to go out of the Synapse environment to work with it. One environment to actually have everything for you. And now comes the last part. So in fact, there is one more compute which has recently come in, which is the Azure Data Explorer. So if you work with a lot of log data, that compute option is now available as well in Synapse. And now comes the major part, which is connectivity of Synapse with various different services. So for example, if I have got some data in Cosmos DB in different types of data stores like Core SQL API, MongoDB, and I want to go ahead and straight away extract that data without moving that data. I just want to go and run a query on the data in Cosmos DB from Synapse. I can do that as well. So, if time permits, we can discuss more on that as well. That's a very interesting architecture. And that is, there is something called Synapse Link, and that is where we have the Cosmos DB. And the Power BI is also integrated in Synapse Studio. Not very not very good integration right now. There are few missing pieces here, but I think over a period of time, if you want to build a Power BI report, just go to the studio and start building your reports. You can still do it, but there are few missing pieces which are there. But you can just go and do Power BI development in Synapse. Then machine learning is integrated. So if let's say you have some data sets and you want to perform sentiment analysis, let's say you have Twitter. So Twitter data, you want to perform sentiment analysis on the tweets. Just right click on the data, say, I want to connect to Azure Cognitive Services and do sentiment analysis. It will automatically help you connect to Azure Cognitive Services, and you can just right click and say, I want to perform this kind of machine learning, and you can do that. So it is integrated with the Azure Cognitive Services, plus it is integrated with Azure Machine Learning. So if you have your own custom models, you can go and do that as well. Plus, of course, there are other things like Azure Purview and stuff. So I'll just kind of leave it at this point. So I hope this would certainly give you a brief idea, what exactly is Synapse here.
Yeah, there's a lot to Synapse. I didn't realize. I'm glad you showed these slides because I didn't really know this. I've got a number of questions which you've probably already answered.
Okay.
But I'm going to still ask you them. So this is a tough question, but when would you choose to use Synapse over the first slide where you had the modern data warehouse? Is there a time where you would say, I have a certain amount of data that I should probably use Synapse over just using SQL, Power BI, and Azure Data Factory? At what point do you think is that point I should start looking at Synapse?
Yeah, so basically, the modern data warehouse is just an architecture. And if I just go ahead and complete this architecture, you can actually build the same modern data warehouse architecture in Synapse as well, where you do the ingestion using Synapse pipelines instead of Data Factory. You store it in the integrated Gen 2 environment, Data Lake Gen 2. You process your data with Spark pools, dedicated SQL pools, or other options, and you can model and serve using Serverless SQL. So the point is that the modern data warehouse is an architecture that you can build using Synapse or the individual services. Now, what you asked is that, at what point shall we look for Synapse? In case you are using too many different Azure data services, it makes a lot of sense to actually, and obviously, any data project, any warehouse project or any big data project does involve a lot of components. So it makes more and more sense to actually start using Synapse. So if you just want to use one or two components of Synapse, fine. Maybe in the future you would want to use more things. You can, you can do that in the same Synapse workspace. And even if you're using three components, let's say, so you'll have, instead of doing management, monitoring, security at different places, why not bring it in one single place? So Azure does allow you to migrate your stuff, let's say from Data Lake is anyways there. So it's a common thing. You can connect it to Synapse and start working. If you have got, let's say, code written in Spark, as I mentioned, so you have it in Databricks, you have it in HD Insight, you want to bring it over to Synapse, it's not such a big thing to do. So these things are, and if you have got pipelines in ADF, you want to bring it into Synapse, you can easily bring that as well. So most of the components, most of the things that you have learned about these individual services, you can actually use them within the Synapse environment.
Awesome. And is there much of a cost? I guess what I was asking is there any kind of size of data? So at work, where I work, we have lots of customers who have small amounts of data. So we've kind of went for the traditional one, the kind of individual services. And I'm just wondering, is it worth moving to Synapse, or would there be a certain amount of data you would kind of recommend before you would want to look at Synapse?
Yeah, actually not, Gregor. If you have got very less volumes of data,
Mhm.
let's say typically, why there is no, of course, there is no
Yeah,
boundary that says, okay, if it's 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte, but just as
yeah.
in from experience perspective, if you have got volumes less than one or let's say 2 terabytes, I don't think it makes sense to go with any big data,
Right.
these big data technologies.
Okay.
Of course, you can use that. Let's say, you can wrap up your jobs in much quicker time, but then you'll have to see that uh, obviously there is some overhead involved, so you have to see that whether you are spending too much. Obviously
Yes.
cost is an important factor.
Yeah.
If you have got very less volumes like 500 GB or something, Azure SQL Server, Oracle, or these databases are way too good, to do these kind of processing. But of course, if you have got huge volumes, then you can go look at Snowflake, Synapse, Databricks, Redshift, and all these different technology big data pieces to to actually help you do things faster.
Okay. Cool. Um, Next question. I'm just looking at my question. You've probably answered most of my questions. So we've got dedicated SQL pools and always available serverless SQL pools. I guess you've already covered, but what to use and when?
The dedicated SQL pool and serverless
Yeah,
SQL pool.
yeah.
See, dedicated SQL. Okay, I'll just again. I think I have got some quick things to show
Cool.
you. So
Awesome.
I'll just I'll. So basically, dedicated SQL pool is an MPP architecture, and as far as I have. I've also attended few sessions on the roadmap of Synapse. So there's going to be a right. Obviously there are big changes which are coming into dedicated SQL as well to make it more compatible with the other services. But currently, as it stands out, dedicated SQL pool is slightly isolated in the Synapse world because there are not too many connectivities which are there in terms of that. If you have got data into dedicated SQL pool database, you cannot actually query that using serverless SQL pool. So there are few integration, the loopholes which are there, which and Microsoft is now trying to make a dedicated SQL pool very much like Snowflake. Uh, obviously they haven't said that, but as far as I could understand, that's my own observation. It could be wrong as well, but they're trying to make it, dedicated SQL pool a very interesting. I still feel it's a very good product, but they're now trying to make it, more open and make it more, useful for the customers. Now, what we see here is that dedicated SQL pool is an MPP database, so which helps you perform distributed data processing. So if you want to process now in SQL Server, what happens is that you have got engine and you have got your data in one single place. Let's say you have a machine, you have installed SQL Server, so the compute engine and the data is in one place. Of course, you can attach multiple disks, but it's actually just a way of expanding your storage. But otherwise, the compute and the engine is in one place. Now, when we talk about dedicated SQL, it has got separate compute and separate storage. So that means that, and you can have not just one compute engine, you can have multiple compute engines. So that means that if I'm processing, let's say, X amount of data with one compute engine, I can actually go and say, okay, instead of one compute engine, I want two compute engines. So I'm getting those two compute engines, which will again do the same work. So obviously, the time can be reduced by half. So that is something that we get in dedicated SQL, and it's a slightly older product, but still highly improved and pretty good one. So but the only thing is that you or in fact you can create your database. Inside that, you can create tables, views, short procedures. So if you have got existing projects and you want to migrate to dedicated SQL, you can also do that. But obviously, there are some design changes which are required. But again, the tables and everything concept remain the same. In fact, I also migrated one project from in fact, SQL Server to dedicated SQL some time back, and it actually helped us improve 86% in time, performance improvement in time, and uh, around, I think around 90% cost. But it all depends on how well you make your structure. But the only thing is that as soon as you start the dedicated SQL pool, it's a pre-provisioned compute environment. So if you say I need 2 compute nodes, you have to pay for those 2 compute nodes whether you are running the queries or not. So it's a typical database, just like you connect to a regular database through Management Studio or from Azure Data Studio. You can connect to dedicated SQL, start writing your select queries and other stuff. All the typical SQL commands are available here, whether it is analytical queries or window functions and other stuff. Everything is there. Yes, the only difference is the underlying architecture is different. It performs parallel processing of your queries, so that makes it much faster. So let's say if I'm doing a select query, uh, you know, with a SQL server, that select query has got one engine which is going to run against the database. As soon as I go to dedicated SQL and I've got multiple computes, so if I run a select query, it's not the one engine which is going to process it. They're going to divide the task between them, collect the relevant data, and then combine it. So it's like the parallel processing of data which is happening. Now, then we have got the serverless SQL, which is, as I said, that we don't have to have any kind of pre-provisioned infrastructure. We just pay for the amount of data that is being processed. Again, you can have data, you can write your T-SQL queries, all the analytical functions, any general functions for string, numeric, datetime, window functions, ranking functions, everything is there. But in fact, the difference here is that this type of database does not store any data. This is just an engine. So when we say serverless SQL pool, even though the name says SQL, we should not get confused that it will contain any data. It's just an engine which actually helps you query the data present in data lake, Cosmos DB, Azure SQL, Spark databases. So you can query the data from those places. It does not have any table kind of entity. So
I did not know that.
yeah,
That's
I do you
interesting.
want I can show you a quick demo as well.
That would be cool. Yeah, I did not know that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So let's see that. I'll just show you. So I hope you can see my Synapse environment.
Yes. I think
Okay.
my kind of main question was I was trying to get my head around the dedicated pool and why would you use that? But
Okay.
yeah, please continue.
Sure. So just to clarify on that, the dedicated SQL pool is something which we will go for when we have got way too huge volume of data. Uh, the minimum amount of RAM that you receive, which is it's costly.
Mhm.
It provides you with a lot of resources. So just to give you an idea, the minimum amount of RAM that you get in dedicated SQL pool is 60 GB, and the max that you get is 18,000 GB
Jesus.
in dedicated SQL pool. Obviously,
Oh.
my subscriptions does not allow that. I don't have, and it's like $300 per hour. So.
Yes.
Uh, so basically, if you have got, let's say, huge volumes of data to process, let's say a lot of log data is coming in, maybe log data, or a lot of
Mhm.
let's say files you are collecting. Let's say you're working in an investment bank and you want to analyze huge volumes of data which is coming in. Let's say the tick data. So if you're doing a foreign exchange trading, so there is let's say USD to INR, or pounds to INR. So when you have got every second there is the fluctuations are going on, you want to capture that information, do some analysis on that. So that is where you use, let's say, Spark, or you use dedicated SQL. So if you're
Correct.
comfortable with dedicated SQL environment, then you go with dedicated SQL. If you're comfortable with, let's say, writing Python code, or you want to work with Spark, then you go with Databricks or Synapse Spark. So that is the major difference. And just think about 18,000 GB of RAM it's a huge thing,
Mm.
and it's available out of the box. You just have to have the right amount of money and say, okay, I want to get started, and actually it can give you that. So that's the
Okay, cool.
power of, yeah. So this is basically the Synapse environment. And if I just go to this Manage tab in the Synapse environment. So this is my Synapse workspace. Actually, it's a studio rather. So this is the UI. So we go to the Manage tab, and there we can see the option of SQL pools. And this is where we can create the dedicated SQL pool as well as the serverless SQL pool. So just notice here that we have got a built-in, the name itself is built-in, and this is basically a serverless SQL, and it's basically, it's running. Now, as we discussed, that serverless SQL, you don't pay anything until unless you run a query. So this means that this compute infrastructure is available, but I'm not paying anything for it unless and until I go ahead and run a query. Now, what I can do, so this is the serverless environment. Now, I can go into the data tab. So I just want to show you that here is the compute, which is available. Now I can go to the data tab, and this is where we have got a built-in, the Explorer. I can go and bring in, I can go and create databases in this area. So where I will have dedicated SQL pool databases, serverless SQL pool databases, Spark databases, and there is a new category as well called lake databases. So lots of different types of databases we can have here. And then in the linked section, this is where I can bring, attach multiple sources. So let's say if I've got, blob storage accounts, which, obviously I'm going to bring in data from various sources, blob storage, data lake, Cosmos DB, and Data Explorer, a lot of different places. So what I can do, I can just say, I want to bring in, I want to connect to external data. So this is just a connectivity being established, to the external data. So I can just select any of these options and say, okay, I want to make a connection, get my connections ready. And whenever I want, I should be able to do some right click and say, just show me the data. So without having to transfer the data from these different environments into a Synapse or any other area, I can make a direct query to them.
Okay.
So this is where I can, I can just go and very simple, I can say, okay, I want to connect to Data Lake Gen 2. And if anyone has worked with Data Factory, you'll find that it's very, very similar UI. Let's say continue. It's going to create a linked service, basically, which is basically a connection information to Data Lake account. And I can fill up that information and, make a connection. Now, once I do that, you can see that there are, different types of connections I've already created. So all these, which means I'm now brought in these different sources here. So I'm just slightly going away from serverless SQL part, but I think this will help everyone to get an idea. Now here, I can open up, in fact, I can open up the built-in storage explorer. So here I can see different containers in my data lake. I can open it up. I can see all the files and folders. So I don't even need to go to data lake in Azure portal and do something. I can just right click on anything and I can say, okay, I want to download, delete, rename, manage the access. So built-in Explorer is there, which I feel is one of the most used, in fact, useful things here. Otherwise it's very difficult to go to, Azure portal and go to data lake and do something. So I find, it's pretty good. So this is one thing. Then what I can do, let's assume that I have got basically, let me show you. So I've got a CSV file. Let's say this one. So I've got some taxi zone, or I can go for some Parquet data as well. So I've got a file called yellowtaxis.parquet. Now Parquet is basically a binary format. I can't see what is there in that format. Now with this one, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do right click, new SQL script, select top 100 rows, and remember it's a Parquet file present in data lake. It could be in data lake. It could be some data in Cosmos DB. I just have to say select top 100 rows. This opens up, a query here. So I can just expand this query and you can see it is I'm connected to the built-in serverless SQL pool. And what it is going to do, it is going to use an open roasted command, point to the location in the data lake and say format is of type Parquet. And I can just go ahead and run this one. This should go ahead and show me those 100 records. Now, since I'm doing, let's say I'm doing select top 100 and Parquet is a binary and a columnar format. So it's going to bring in the data. It does not take that much long, but normally it takes 3, 4, 5 seconds to bring us this data. And I can see, everything, all the data is available using a SQL query. Now, whatever amount of data that has been processed, I only have to pay for that. So for example, I just need to go out, go to the monitor section. So again, everything is integrated. From there, I can go to SQL request, whatever queries I've run, and we can notice that it is connected to the built-in pool. We have just run the select top 100 query. This is the one. And to run this, in fact, the file size was around 90 MB. But since we did the select top 100, so we have just used 10 MB of data, and 1 terabyte currently is $5. So you process 1 terabyte of data, or you extract 1 terabyte of data, you pay $5.
Oh,
And just think about, if you have got 500, 600 GB of data, you can actually go ahead and start processing the data. And $5 is something which you will be paying, I think, after,
yeah, a
maybe
long
10,
time.
10. Yeah. So it's a good amount of, and it just
That's
took
cool.
12 seconds without any infrastructure. So if somebody comes, normally what happens is if somebody comes, starts a Spark cluster, and the person is not using it, so we are wasting those resources, we are paying for it. Now
Yeah.
I just ran something, it's working perfectly fine. Now along with this one, then it's not just this query. I can actually go and say, okay, where anything,
Yep.
passenger count is greater than 0. So very simple, I just need to do run this one, and I can actually filter the data. So very become makes it pretty useful.
Mm.
What I can also do is, now these are actually files. If I have to give it to my business users, this may not look very good, that they will have to run some queries
Yeah.
like this. So again, I can do actually, I just want to go ahead and run the query on the whole folder. It will pick up the files from the folder
All right.
and make it available. So just need to change this one. And in fact, there are lots of different commands which are available, so we can work with it. So you can run again, you can run all kinds of analytical functions. You can work with JSON data, you can work with Parquet, CSV, Delta, and Microsoft is bringing more and more formats in this place. So you just need to see the, what is the right format, specify that. If schema is required, you can provide the schema as well, let's say in case of CSV files, and you can start working. Now, if I want to make this available to my end customers, obviously I would not like to, you
Yeah.
know, do like this, because that will confuse them. So what I can do, I can actually go and create a serverless SQL database. And serverless SQL database does not contain any tables. I'll show that to you. Let's say I can go to data, and I can say, let me create a new SQL database. I can just go ahead and do that. And this is where I can say, all right, I want to create a serverless SQL database, and let's call it, uh, festive tech calendar DB. So we're just going to say it like this. And let me just go and create this serverless SQL database. So it will hardly take a few seconds. This database is there, and we don't have to pay anything for this. That's the interesting part. So now I can, in the workspace, if I just go and see, you can see there is a SQL database option, and we have the festive tech calendar database showing up. It's a SQL type, but this is actually, if I open it up, you will not find any tables thing here,
Mhm.
because it does not store any data. Now, what I can do, I can build a logical data warehouse on top of this, in this particular serverless database. So what I can say, all right, I just want to, in this database, I want to create this particular view. I want to create a view on this query. So let's say I just expand this one, and let me just remove this. And let's say in the built-in, let me connect to festive tech calendar DB. And I'll just say, let me create a view, saying view on create view, yellow taxis, uh, and say as, and that's it. This is the query I need to create. And then I can create schemas and everything, which I do in
All right.
typical SQL as well. And
Mhm.
that's it. I just
That's
need to
cool.
create this, run this one. So my yellow taxis view will be ready. And now if any user wants to connect to, let's say through Power BI, Management Studio, they can connect to this particular database. If you want, I can show that to you as well, very simple. So now we have this, so I can just remove this part and say select star from yellow taxis. So what I just need to do is, in fact, we need to give our users a server name. So we can give the server name of the built-in SQL, serverless SQL pool. They can connect to the festive tech calendar. I can set up the right permissions, what kind of databases they can connect to, what objects they have access to, row level. I think row-level securities, I think it's may not be here yet, but I think we can check it out. But yeah, so we can just connect to this and say, okay, I just want to run this query, and we have the data. So for the business users, now they can actually pull this in Power BI, but our data is actually in data lake. So we don't have to move around our data into different databases or data marts. We have our data in the database, or in fact in the data lake. We can create a layer on top of it, and people can go and write any kind of queries they just want to run on top of it. So no infra required. And instead of, if somebody is working with Power BI, they can actually pull this data into the Vertipack engine, import the data. You can run the direct queries as well, but obviously it will consume, whenever you run the query, it will consume some amount of data, and you'll have to pay for it. So I think import will work better. You just import the data once. Data from data lake will go into, using SQL query, it will go into your Power BI Vertipack engine, and now you have the stuff ready. So you can act very easily. I can, and what I actually had to pay for when I ran these queries. So we have just seen that I think 2 or 3 queries we have ran, so a few of them. So I just need to pay for, this is the amount of data that I need to pay for.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, not much, just close to 100 MP or so. Yeah, so that's what
awesome.
we need to pay for. Yes.
Yeah, cool. Okay, awesome. Right, I've got a couple other questions on other stuff. Let me just find them. Is there much difference between Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse pipelines? What's the difference between the two? Are they trying to make them? Are they trying to bring up Synapse so they're identical type thing?
Yep. So basically, they are based on the same code base. The only major difference that I'll just show you here is the difference between. Just a second. So I'll just show you an article link on the Microsoft documentation.
Oh, cool.
It's a very simple one. The major difference is the SSIS integration runtime. So it has got the Azure integration runtime support. It has got the self-hosted integration runtime support, which means you can bring in your data from on-prem sources, but it does not have SSIS integration runtime support. So just notice, this is the major thing which is there. If you are still have the SSIS packages, you can go for the ADF, but I think that has become very less people are using it. But I think Microsoft may make this as a on parity with the. But yeah, currently it's not there. There are few basic things like integration runtime sharing and all, which are slightly advanced things. Obviously in production you may need that, but I think this is something which will definitely come up very shortly. But I'm not sure about the SSIS integration runtime, if they are going to bring in that or not. But rest of the things, yeah, it's more about the SSIS packages, and yeah, rest all looks good. So
is there a point where Azure Synapse Pipelines is required over using Data Factory? Is there any point where you need Synapse pipelines over Data Factory, or no? Is that not a thing?
Not exactly. So the other thing is, if you come into Synapse environment, let's say if I start creating, let's say a pipeline, so I can go to integrate tab. I can just say I want to create a pipeline. So it's completely built in, and you can see now you will not even find a difference between the ADF.
Identical. Yeah,
it's exactly the same. The only thing which is here is the Synapse, this particular section. These are the activities. These are Synapse activities. So you can create a notebook, just like you create a Spark notebook, or in Databricks, you create a notebook there. And in Synapse also you create a notebook. So if you want to run them, so these are the, the built-in things. And if you have got dedicated SQL Pool database, you don't have to go and make a connection to dedicated SQL because it's all integrated. So I can say, all right, I want to run a SQL stored procedure, which is basically, I think this is for, yeah. So this is for the dedicated SQL pool. I can just make a connection, I can just select from here if you have one. And, so this is makes it pretty quick. But otherwise you will have to, and in fact, if you want to run Databricks notebooks here, you can also do that. So just establish a connection to Databricks and start running. So if you want to process your data still using Databricks, up to you, but then you can process it, put it back to data lake, and use serverless SQL on top of it.
Okay, cool. Next question is, I did a little bit of reading earlier. What is Azure Synapse Link? Tell me all about that. What's that?
Oh, okay, that's a pretty interesting topic actually. So yeah, so what I'll do, I'll just show you an option here. So first, let me show you through a demo, and then I'll tell you what exactly is happening behind the scene. Now, what I can do, let me see if I remember, um, the end, basically the account that I have. Let me just see. So I'm going to click connect to data, and I'm going to say connect to external data, and I want to bring in, let's say, Cosmos DB Core SQL API. Let's connect to that, and let me call it Cosmos DB1. Let's see if I can. Yeah, I think I remember. It must have that. Okay. Yes, I think something is there. So I'm just going to bring this in.
So you're going to query Cosmos DB from Synapse.
No, I already have a Cosmos DB account. I just selected one here, from the drop down, which was, so I just had one. So I just selected this one, and I'm selecting my existing one, and I've got a database called Family DB. And let me create this connection. Now, what is actually happening behind the scene is I can show you one thing from Azure portal that will actually help us understand this concept. And this is connected. So while this is opening up, I can just refresh this one. Yeah, I'll just refresh my workspace, and it should show me, it should be in the links option. I did not have to refresh, but yeah. Okay. Right. So now you can see, the Azure Cosmos DB is also connected here. I can just go to this one. So Cosmos DB is Family DB database is connected. Yep. So this is the collection within the database. And I can just go and say, click on this one, new notebook, and I can start analyzing the data from Cosmos DB into Spark. And I can say, just click this one. And this is just set up some code for us to pick up the data from Cosmos DB straight. So there's a built-in connector, or in fact, there's a built-in, very high-speed connector called Cosmos.oltp. There is another one called Cosmos.olap as well, which is available. But let me just show you, let's say if I go into, this one is not showing up. Okay. So what I'm going to do is for this family collection, I'll just come to my, let me see if I have the right Cosmos account. Okay. So I'm going to go to this one. And now when I go to Data Explorer, I'm going to go ahead and create a new container here. And let's see if I can, if just opens up.
Sorry, I've put you on the spot here. Oh, good.
Yeah, so it's opening up now. Let me just create, see if I can create a database. Now, not this one. Yeah. Sorry for that. I'll just open it once again. Okay, so we have got, let me just create a new container. And you'll notice one thing, there is something called as analytical store. Okay. So what exactly is happening here? And along with this one, you'll find that there is something called as, if I go to features option in Cosmos DB, you'll find that there is something called as Azure Synapse link. Now, what is going on behind the scene? And I'm just going to create this first, and I'll share this concept behind, so I'll just create quickly a new container. Let me just call it, DB number. Okay, so yeah, so I'll just create a new database called DB2 and give it some kind of RUs, create a container in that, and say this is container 1. Okay, and then I'll just make sure that analytical store is set to on. Now, what this is going to do, okay, I'll just set it to manual and 400. Yeah, so a small one. So I'll just create this one. Now, what will happen behind the scene is, let me show you through a diagram. So I'll just tell you what is going on in this case. Now, what will happen here is, first of all, we have got this Cosmos DB container. So this is the, this is the container that we have just created. Yep. This is on the Cosmos DB side. Now, what we will do, we'll just go and start, we'll start storing the data into this particular container. Everybody, this is the OLTP based container. This is basically optimized for, for reading and writing the, in fact, more for writing the data faster, because we want to write a lot of data. Now, this is basically in OLTP format here, and this is a row by row format. So all my data, or let's say document by document, I'm storing that in the container. Now what will happen when we enable Synapse link? Okay, and we just go ahead and say we want to enable the Synapse link part. And once you enable the Synapse link and enable the analytical store, behind the scene, Microsoft will go ahead and create another Cosmos DB container. So this is the transactional container.
Yeah.
So when we say OLTP, that's the transactional container. So we have got the Cosmos DB and now the the transactional store. And with as soon as I enable the Synapse link and say I want to create the analytical store. So you saw the option of analytical store.
Yeah.
So this is going to make it as the analytical store. Now this is basically an in the OLAP format. So this is a columnar format of storage. Column by column. So this is highly optimized for big data workloads or for big data extraction, because now it is in the into the OLAP format. So if somebody says I just want to see one attribute from my documents, let's say if I have sales data, I just want to see the order ID information. So I can only extract order ID. I don't have to touch the other attributes. So putting that into a columnar format makes this big difference. Now what will happen here is that as soon as the customers or let's say applications are writing data to this one, within 2 to 5 minutes, so this is 2 to 5 minutes time, typically it's 2 minutes, but max it's 5 minutes, it is going to copy the data into this analytical store. And then on the other side we have got the Synapse part. Now when we connected this store, what happened, it actually did not connect to the transactional container, it actually connected to the analytical container. So now when you extract the query, now this analytical store is only available to Synapse. So when we run query in Synapse on in Cosmos DB, actually it is hitting the OLAP container, and this means the queries will be extracting data will be extremely fast. Benefit number one. Second, there is no effect on this transactional store because obviously we are extracting millions of records. No effect on that because this is completely separate, and this is every 2 to 5 minutes the data is getting synced here. So any new record that comes in, it uses its change data feed, pushes the data to the analytical store, makes it into a columnar format. So very, very highly optimized, only available to Synapse. And now when you run a query in Synapse, it hits this one. No effect on the throughput of the transactional container. No load on that container. Then number three, you get data in columnar, so extraction is faster, queries are faster. So all this you get here. And what exactly is this? This Synapse link works on the concept of HTAP, and this is what is known as the hybrid transactional and analytical process. Or this is the concept. So what is now happening currently, we have got the Synapse link for Cosmos DB. I think there is a private preview, I think, going on. I don't have the access to that. There is a Synapse link for Azure SQL as well. So that means that if you have Azure SQL and you enable Synapse link, if not today, maybe very quickly in the future. So once you enable Synapse link for Azure SQL, automatically it will start copying the data from your Azure SQL into a separate storage, which is a read-only format. So this is read-write, this is read-only. So it will copy your data into columnar format. If you don't have column store indexes, it will put that in the columnar. Hopefully, that will be the solution. And then once you run a query, your Azure SQL will not be burdened because you are extracting a lot of data. It is going to extract the data from that read-only store. So that is, the hybrid transactional and analytical processing. And using Synapse link, we enable HTAP. So just like, we created something here, which is the DB number 2. Now, and if I just go ahead and say, all right, I want to go ahead and so currently, I think we have just connected family DB. I just need to connect to one more. Saying connect to external data. Very simple, you just see it's an easy way to just bring in the data which is required, and then I can just verify. So DB number 2, that's it. Test the connection, see how quick it is. I'm just making a connection to Cosmos DB, and then I can use Serverless SQL to actually query that data. If it's in analytical storage enabled, I can just go and just use Serverless SQL on top of it. So I'll just show you that option as well, Cosmos DB number 2. And now this should allow me, see that because the analytical store is enabled. So in the previous case, the analytical store was not enabled. So that's why we could not see the option of serverless SQL. But now because it is enabled, so I can just say right click, new SQL script, select top 100 rows, and notice it's going to just need to pass in, the shared access signature for the Cosmos DB account. And then you can actually start writing queries directly on Cosmos DB, create a view on top of it. Users will just say, okay, we want to pull the data from, from the view. They don't know that actually data is coming from Cosmos DB's analytical store.
That's
so
crazy.
you just create a logical data warehouse on top of it.
That's very cool. Very cool. Right, Mohit, I've got one last question for you. Where in your opinion is the best place to learn more about Azure Synapse?
Yeah. So I think we were discussing that earlier as well. The documentation, I don't find that to be very honest. That's my opinion. I don't find that to be a very good one. I think they still need to improve that. That's what I feel. But again, that's one of the locations to learn that. Number two, there is Microsoft Learn. So there is, there are modules available there on Microsoft Learn, which you can use that. And just to do some, some shameless self-promotion, I've got a course on Pluralsight as well. So there is a course on Pluralsight.
Can you bring that up? Can you bring that up in the browser? Yeah. You're allowed to.
Of course.
You're allowed to plug yourself. Don't worry about that.
Sure. So this is, course on. So I've got few courses on Databricks, on Synapse, and on Snowflake as well. And so there are two courses available. One on building your first data lakehouse with Azure Synapse. It's a slightly bigger one, 3 hours. And there we discuss, dedicated SQL pool in detail, serverless SQL pool in detail, Synapse Spark, pipelines, mapping data flows. We discuss all these different components in detail. And then there is a shorter one, which is the data literacy course. If you just have got lesser time, a quick 42-minute course to see that, okay, that most of the things we discussed here, in fact, not most of them, but how these different things play out. So demos are there. So you may not be able to follow along, but you'll have all the things to get started with Synapse. But yeah, the second one is, actually goes a lot deeper and talks about, all the different integrations which are there, how. So if you want to query from serverless SQL to Spark, how you can do that, from Spark to dedicated SQL, how to do that. So all possible integration combinations are there, for you to check it out. So I'll just, this is the one option. Microsoft Learn is another one. Then you have got the, of course, the Microsoft documentation, which is a pretty good place.
Brilliant. Cool. Thank you very much for this. I've learned a lot. Well, an awful lot, more than nothing. Yeah, there's a lot that I didn't know about, to be honest. Yeah, I just wanted to say
know that.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time in doing this. A lot of people will get a lot of information out of this. So what we'll do is we'll stop recording a wee second. But I just wanted to say thank you for doing this and thank you for taking part in the Festive Tech Calendar.
Thank you for having me here, and I look forward to to contribute more to this one. But before that, happy holidays, and I hope everybody has a good new year.
Yeah, same. Thanks, Mahit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. See you next time. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.